My name is Paul Miller, aka DJ Spooky, and I'm artist, writer, and musician, and I am artist in residence here at the Maryland Institute of Contemporary Art, and I'm in New York, Implant. At the moment, it's been incredibly beautiful to be here in Baltimore and see how incredibly rich and diverse the situation is, although that is in contrary to what everybody else has said earlier. But to me, from being from New York, it is real. I want to begin tonight with a brief overview, and I'm going to be a little bit non-linear because I'm a DJ as well. So here we are in 2014. It's the 25th anniversary of the internet as we know it. And when Tim Berners-Lee invented it in 1989, a whole bunch of things were happening when I was a kid. First and foremost, I was growing up in Washington, D.C., and we had had several years of Mayor Marion Barry smoking crack on one screen and Ronald Reagan on the other. So, we tend to think of it as a little bit of a update of that when you look at Toronto. I'll leave it at that. So what happens in the Internet Minute? As a writer, as an artist, as a musician, I'm very interested in the way that digital media transforms almost all aspects of what it means to be in one place. So for example, as we sit here in this next 4 minutes left to me, over 2 million Google search queries will have been made, 1.3 million YouTube queries and videos being uploaded. That's more video than any human being could watch in their entire life. There will be over 20 million Flickr uploads, and the list goes on. So when I was getting this piece together, I was just in the middle of finishing my next book for MIT, and it's called The Imaginary App. And so I was interested in how apps had changed the way we think about creative processes overall. So whenever you think of an app, the first thing you have to think of is you're touching a screen. Now, it's kind of an interesting moment because when you think about how much that means when we're looking at our cell phones and smartphones, let's take that in perspective. And amusingly, between 1962 to 2012, there's over if you think about 72.4 billion books have been sort of bought, sold, and read. Whereas, the iPad's only been out since 2010, and the iTunes Store for apps has only been out for a little bit. And in just 1 year, we've had over 102 billion apps downloaded through the iTunes Store. So let's do the math on that. You guys are a kind of geek crowd, right? So if we think about that, we're looking at new kinds of literacy that have exploded exponentially. So when Tim Berners-Lee was looking at creating the web as we know it now at CERN in Switzerland, he was trying to figure out how to compress data and files from these huge quantum physics experiments. And we needed to be able to access those files quickly and reference them and be able to look at them as kind of allocation resources for everyone to share. So if you're a scientist at CERN, essentially you needed to be able to have a collaborative environment to be able to have more robust experiments. So when I was putting my next book together for MIT, the first thing that came to mind was, what is the app cover? So when you think of an app, the first thing that's going to come to mind is the graphic design. What I did with my last book for MIT, which is called Sound Unbound, we tracked down a gentleman by the name of Alex Steinweiss. He's considered to be the inventor of the record cover sleeve. Now, in the 1920s and 1930s, if you went into a record store, you essentially saw a blank sleeve. But he said one day, why don't we put an image on the record cover sleeve to see what the sound looks like? So considering that, he's essentially the inventor of what we think of as modern graphic design relating to music. So whenever you see an album cover, or now an app cover, or for that matter, in iTunes, you're essentially looking at something that he invented as a graphic designer. This intrigues me. And when you think about how many slides I'm showing you, I'm trying to kind of deal with that 1 minute upload kind of ratio there. So 15 slides, a slide every 15 seconds just doesn't do it for me. So here we go. This is considered to be the first record cover sleeve. And if you think about it, it's a record that's imposed on a concert marquee. But if we scroll to 2014 and compare that to apps, you can easily see the same logic at work. A record cover sleeve is just about activating a cultural space, much in the same way that an app cover is about activating a software. So let's think of this as code as culture. So when I was putting my talk together, one of the first things that came to mind was in 1977, there was a satellite that went out of our was launched to go out of our solar system called Voyager. Now, one of my favorite scientists is Carl Sagan, because essentially he's kind of one of these quirky bohemian guys that just kind of pops up all the time. But he said, why don't we put a record on the satellite? And so maybe a couple million years from now, when aliens finally get to see it, they're essentially going to get a gold record that's got sounds of the Earth, also with this crazy message from President Carter. So they put uranium-238 isotope on the vinyl, or the gold, and then put various binary codes so that an alien would get the grooves on the record and be able to, actually that's meant to show you, by the way, just so you can, I'll just zoom in here. So if you're an alien out there, you would be able to look at the binary code to know that you have to drop a needle in the record, okay? So very important. So if you're in like Alpha Centauri and the satellite goes by, now you know. So when you're thinking about design, the first thing you have to do is talk to people. So with records, if you look at Thomas Edison, who's one of the main inventors of the whole process, if we think of the phonograph, the whole thing that comes to mind is how sound was encoded. So what these guys did was say, okay, we're going to have uranium-238 as a particle decay, so that essentially the half-life of the atomic particles will tell the other alien civilization how long this satellite has been in orbit. Again, most aliens I know would not be able to do that. But if we're thinking about, Carl Sagan, we have to kind of update the formula a little bit. So if you're thinking about apps, you're thinking about the web, you're thinking about design, how do we think about tactility? How do we think about creating forms and new kind of ideas that give people a sense of logos and designs that encounter these kinds of things that we're interpreting as cultural space? I'm really interested in that as an artist, and my residency has been exploring that a little bit, and it's been a serious pleasure to be here in Baltimore. So I'll have to figure out some fun ways to encode my experience in this kind of record next time. So with that said and done, one of the things I wanted to do was kind of riff on a project. I'm getting nonlinear, as I tend to do. So that project became a piece that premiered at the London Museum of Design called The Imaginary App. And I essentially asked a whole bunch of artists to come up for app covers for apps that don't exist. So when people went into the museum, they were encountering all these different kinds of software ideas that were essentially about a rule set. So I'm going to wrap up with that and ask the audience to imagine an app at the edge of what you would be using today in 2014 and think about putting it on a satellite maybe. So my name's DJ Spooky, and you'll see me sort of wandering about Baltimore thinking about apps for the next couple months. And thanks.